Right, we're going to start talking about primary data collection. You'll recall that primary data is data that hasn't been collected before, and it can generally be collected via qualitative or quantitative techniques. And in this chapter, that's chapter 7, we're going to focus primarily on qualitative techniques. But before that, let's just have a look at market research data, specifically primary data, and just reflect on where we are. You can see, looking at the diagram, there's secondary data. Well, we dealt with that in the last chapter, and then primary data, and you can see that's split into quantitative data and qualitative data. And qualitative data, for the purposes of this course, is split into in-depth interviews, projective techniques, and focus groups. We'll deal with quantitative data in the next chapter, so I won't go through all of those right now. Now, just to remind you, and we have touched on this before, the difference between qualitative data or qualitative research and quantitative research, and it probably deserves just touching on it once more. Generally, with qualitative research, you're probing, you're asking questions, and the sample size is a lot smaller generally with qualitative research. And with quantitative research, one can justify the sample size with reference to specific techniques, or statistical techniques, that is, and the various ways of doing it, and that goes beyond the scope of this course. With qualitative research, it's slightly different. One way of doing it, and there are different ways of doing it, is what they call data or data saturation. So you interview people, or you have focus groups. So eventually, when the researcher feels that the answers are consistent, they call that data saturation. So what they're saying is that there's no point in carrying on doing more and more qualitative data collection techniques, such as I've mentioned, focus groups, in-depth interviews, and projective techniques. And then that's where you stop it, and that can be disclosed up front. In terms of managing the data collection, really, obviously, with qualitative research, you need people with particular skills to manage the process, as opposed to with a quantitative, where you don't necessarily need people with particular skills. Qualitative research, as I mentioned, it's a small group of people, not representative, and the focus is really onto understanding various aspects such as consumer behavior, opinions, attitudes, etc. In-depth data, as I mentioned, and it is worthwhile repeating. Data collection methods are usually unstructured. Analysis is non-statistical, and it's reliant on the researcher's interpretation. So often when one does this type of research, you have to disclose upfront your interests, and say, this is who I am, this is who's paying me, because that definitely can have an impact on the interpretation or the way the process is managed, and the results. And it's most useful when looking at exploratory studies, to try and okay, so looking at different types of qualitative research techniques, the one is a focus group technique. It's really where you have some sort of moderator who directs proceedings in terms of the discussion. I do recall that we, myself and a colleague, ran some focus groups for a marketing research company at some stage, and what it related to yogurts. So what we did, we got a whole lot of people, in our case, the purchasers of yogurts, who were generally the homemakers, or the people who managed the home. And we got them at a restaurant, and we gave them different types of yogurt and asked their opinion. And to be honest, it was quite challenging. It is on the one hand, as a moderator of a focus group, you want to get as many differing views as possible. But on the other hand, people tend to get a bit excited, or they did in the focus group that we were doing. I suppose that had something to do with the free breakfast that they were getting. And they got sidetracked. So it's that balance that one needs to maintain. I guess that's why you need someone who's skilled and experienced in managing of this type of research method. Obviously, in today's world, that's not going to work. We wouldn't be able to do that today. So online focus groups are becoming more and more important. And I suppose if we wanted to do a similar study, we would have to deliver the yogurt to people at their homes, put people on perhaps Zooms or Microsoft Teams, and try and run a similar discussion. There are obviously advantages and disadvantages associated with both the normal physical focus group, as well as the online focus groups, and those are discussed in quite a lot of detail in your textbook, so it doesn't really warrant me going through this again. So yeah, just have a look at it there. Okay, moving on. Another one is an in-depth interview. These are also relatively unstructured, and it's generally on a kind of one-on-one basis. And the interviewer sort of will make suggestions, ask probing questions, trying to get the people to engage with perhaps difficult things which would otherwise be difficult to, or challenging to get them to discuss. And planning is quite important. So typically what you'd do is that you'd have some kind of note or template which you'd work through without making it too obvious to the interviewee. Yeah, so, and it's typically used when an issue is of a confidential nature, and you really need some detailed analysis perhaps on, how do you make a decision. Many years ago, I recall Johnson & Johnson talking about how they went to understand what their consumers want. So what they would do is that they would send somebody, and they would spend the day, say for example with a mother of a newborn child, and it's not quite an in-depth interview, but nevertheless the person would spend the whole day with them, asking them questions and being able to understand exactly the issues that they faced. So you get quite a kind of big insight into what concerns. In that case, they were looking at baby shampoo. So there are different ways of doing these in-depth interviews, and also once again there are a number of advantages and disadvantages which you can just check in your textbook and try and understand them. Fairly straightforward, so I'm not going to deal with them right now. Projective techniques, yeah, these are typically word associations, and sometimes what you do is that you talk in the, I think it's the third person, yes, third person. So you'd say the consumer would do this. So for example, if I was a consumer, how would your typical consumer feel about let's say hygiene products, for example, and or you would have a situation where they would complete a sentence, or perhaps look at cartoons and see what people think about those cartoons, and I mean it's a whole psychological basis to this, and once again there are advantages and disadvantages to this type of technique, which you can discuss, which you can look in your textbook and consider. Alright, let's consider the benefits and limitations associated with qualitative research. Qualitative research offers a number of benefits. Firstly, it's less costly than quantitative research. If you think about the quantitative research having to send people out to collect data and print questionnaires, analyze the data, capture the data, so it can be a lot less costly than quantitative data. So it also gives greater insights to consumer motivation. You have somebody who will pick up on a theme and possibly press people to disclose more about their thoughts. It can also assist in making quantitative research more efficient, in that you can have a look at the results, and I spoke about gender a moment ago, and possibly push males or females in terms of why they've got different perceptions, trying to understand it in a little bit more detail. There are limitations associated with qualitative research, and the one is that it's not as effective in distinguishing small differences in the marketing mix, perhaps related to gender. Qualitative research is not considered representative of the population, even though often quite big decisions are kind of made on the basis of qualitative research. One big disadvantage about qualitative research is that it can be influenced by a dominant individual, for example, in a focus group. And if you think of examples of families, say for example, or somebody who's a lot older and well respected, and people in the focus group might not want to contradict the person, those are all aspects that we need to consider when using qualitative research. And lastly, as much as market researchers try and be objective, sometimes they may bring their own experiences or own prejudices into the interview or the research process. I recall chatting to one of Johnson & Johnson's marketing manager. In fact, she was the marketing manager for Johnson & Johnson for South Africa, and a very well respected as well as astute individual. And she was saying to me, one of the last things she ever wanted to hear from one of her marketing people was that I wouldn't. So it's not about what you think or what I think as a marketer or a business owner. It's really about what the consumer thinks, and I think that's quite a profound thing, and something that one needs to bear in mind. Alright, well, that's the end of chapter 7. Our next chapter relates to the quantitative data collection, primary data collection clearly. I'll see you then.